As a warm-up discussion, I'd like you guys to turn to a neighbor and talk a little bit. What are your concerns or thoughts or ideas about plagiarism when the word plagiarism comes up? But take it a step further. In relation to originality, your research agenda, your original voice and intellectual intervention in the field, your leadership, your contribution to the field, relate to that. Where are your anxieties? What are your thoughts and perspectives? What bothers you, excites you? So let's have a quick initial discussion with a neighbor. It is so appropriate for this particular workshop. They are your original ideas. Not they're being influenced. So, what did you come up with? What were the issues, concerns in your group? Quickly, very, very quickly, because we have a lot to cover.
Like in my point of view, suppose if we try to give a grade for a person who we are copying from, like we'll grade the person who like wrote a paper before 3 to 5 years back, but we don't give grade for the person who has started the work.
Sometimes that goes, yeah, I know. Well, there are citations within citations that if you need to do. Second, if you don't go to the original source, the readers was going to question you. You go to the original source. It's one click away, right? So go to the original source if that source is significant enough. If not, if the second person citing the first source does a more significant job of analyzing, assessing, synthesizing the ideas, then it is citation sounds good. If you're depending on second citation, whereas your main substance is coming from the first, skip the second, go to the original, right? But you're raising a more complex issue than we can discuss now. It's a good one. It's a good one. Okay, your group. I'll let one of you.
So we kind of spoke a little bit about the clarity between the fuzziness, I guess, would be more appropriate for paraphrasing as opposed to citing. So you read a paragraph, right, and you paraphrase it. Is that plagiarism, or you know what I mean? Like, where do you draw the line?
Yes. Yeah. People have tried to solve that problem by coming up with this billion-dollar company that will run your paper through a system and say every 3 words should not match, right? But students always can right-click and put a synonym. But that's not the point, especially for graduate students, and especially if you're not simply trying to mechanically avoid the plagiarism. I think that's a significant complex issue also. If the idea itself is not yours, doesn't matter whether you paraphrase or you quote. And so I think that if you're trying to develop your idea first, flesh it out, so you don't have to think about other people's ideas. And once you present your ideas, then it's easier for you to keep the borrowed source or separate from your original idea. Then you could signal a summary move, or you can signal a quotation move. But if the beginning of a paragraph, let's say, is not strong and substantive enough, right? Then that problem becomes more glaring, right? I know the fuzziness, we cannot completely avoid it.
Yeah.
But how the fuzzy border between quoting and paraphrase standing in relation to the stem of the paragraph? If you have presented a very strong idea, a little fuzziness is tolerable. But if your main idea is fuzzy, then you're in closer to trouble, I guess, right? That makes sense?
Yes.
It's relative, but you're raising a very important question.
Yeah, my teammate already left, but before she left, she mentioned it may be easy to have this plagiarism unintentionally. So that's why she wants to know how to avoid it, because she just worried that she may have it unintentionally. It's just so easy. There's so many resources out there. That's what she said.
There is a Cornell University website where you can go and practice for about 2 hours. I will, if you guys can, Chicago, can we pass a sheet for their email?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great. And so I could send it, and it's an exercise. It's really substantive. It goes through, it basically tests you. Do you think this is plagiarism? Do you think this is not? It's very fun. It's gamified, sort of interactive activity. It's worth it, if not during the semester, but then maybe during the winter break when you sit there and just do something. Bookmark it. It's a good idea. I'll send it to you. So there are resources like that. And then today we're going to cover a little bit of the how that intentional plagiarism versus unintentional plagiarism versus lack of originality in the next activity. But let us quickly move forward. Yeah.
So we sort of hit the same question of like unintentional plagiarism, especially when it comes to your field being like the practice of citing other works. You're supposed to be yes-anding, and in your yes-anding, it's very hard to find a voice because of the fact that it depends so heavily on other people's work.
Yeah.
So that's that.
I have a lot about that, addressing that, how do you yes and how to develop more original ideas. A lot later on, start talking. Do you want to share anything from our group? We talked a little bit about.
Yeah, I mean, we talked just how do you encourage all writers, not just undergraduates or graduates, but people who are working here. How do you get rid of the anxiety around the plagiarism idea so that people can ask the legitimate questions that they have as the internet evolves and society changes and we sort of come to terms with how our ideas fit in with the planet Earth. But I mean, maybe I'm taking this, but just sort of, how do we create constructive, positive conversations about how excited we should all be about citing the ideas of others?
We were also thinking about undergraduate students, and unless we convince them that the paper is worth it, doesn't matter.
Right.
Right? If they buy a paper, in their mind they may be thinking, well, I'm paying so much for a course anyway, I'm paying a little bit more for a paper. That's the paradigm through which some students think. It's an investment. I don't build my own car, I buy. Right? I don't fix my own car, I pay. So I can ask someone to revise my essay, to edit my essay, or to write my essay. So that logic is out there. Actually, that is the logic by which all of these companies on the internet exist. They're probably able to defend themselves against legal action. Because ultimately this is about ethics. So our mission in the university, especially with undergraduate students that many of you may be teaching, is not to only teach students how to avoid being hurt. It is to teach them how to build the buildings of knowledge, right? Of course we have to think about how to put on hard hats and gloves, and we need to teach them the citation skills. But those are only precautions. The actual work of the university is to build knowledge and to, first of all, be convinced that we are in the business of building knowledge ourselves, rather than trading it or buying it. Thanks. So let's go. If we look at the definition of sitting in the definition, then it emphasizes it's a Latin word. Plagiarist means kidnapper. Kidnap, right? And so plagiarize is to kidnap, forcibly take, steal, and claim as your own. Every university also adopts that basic definition, and they have to, right? They have to draw the red lines. But there's a lot more beyond the definitions. As I said in the blurb of our workshop, I said graduate students, however, need to take a step further to curb plagiarism from its inception. How do you engage the scholarship in your field? By first developing intellectual original and solid positions of your own. So what the definition gets a little blurry when you look at actual cases of research on plagiarism. If you look at these students, what they said about why they plagiarize, it starts in a very murky place. They say, the first student says, I felt that everything I wrote sounded juvenile, so I went on the internet to get ideas so maybe I could build on them, right? Then I went back to write the paper. Every time I wrote a sentence, I erased it because I didn't like it. This went on for a while until I quickly decided to steal someone else's idea. So, so these are issues of struggle, time management, motivation, and then at some point the boundary is crossed. But sometimes the boundary is not that clear. It's more blurry, as you were saying. In the case of actual plagiarism, not in the case of our citation, honest citation. When I'm taking notes for a good essay, graded essay, I begin to take other people's opinions or on certain things, and I end up with these big notes, some of which is mine, some of which is other people's, and then begins to blur that line. Is that what I've said? I don't know whether I said it or someone said it. Like I was saying earlier, we read, we take notes, meticulously put quotation signs and page numbers, and keep this idea separate from ours. But when we sleep, our brain begins to synthesize ideas. It's notorious, right? And when we wake up, we may be actually writing other people's ideas. It even gets that blurry. So what is the solution to that? The solution to that is to develop your idea in relation to other people's ideas, so to elevate them so high that other people's ideas don't look like that relative to yours. How do we do that? That's what I want to cover. Yeah, so because unintentional plagiarism takes place because of mistakes, they are an indication that someone is learning. Errors are an indication of learning. I'm thinking not only about undergraduate students, I'm thinking about graduate students genuinely invested in their work. They too will make mistakes. Errors can happen. So the second thing is they don't know what is common knowledge and what is not common knowledge. Or they may have other misunderstood expectations. There may be differences in conventions. If somebody is using an MLA style, but if somebody is required to use MLA style, but if they paraphrase APA style, the professors will say you plagiarized. It's that simple sometimes. Because in MLA, in APA, you paraphrase a lot. Or another one is professional context. When you go to certain jobs, you don't actually write all the letters. You just pull templates and plug in new information. But the same thing is not allowed. Templates are not allowed in academia, or maybe they are. In business school, they are. Quite often. Some professors allow, others don't. So the variations between professional context, disciplinary context, and even from one professor to another in the same department. This makes the picture very, very complex, right? And the causes are not dishonesty alone. Not knowing, lacking the skills, lacking the confidence in your own ideas, so that other people's ideas consciously, semi-consciously, unconsciously become dominant in your writing, and lacking time or not having a time management skill. And the last thing that I'll come to in a moment is information management. Our brains are not designed for PhD and master's degrees. They're not. You cannot basically manage that much of information unless you are a special type of genius. I'm too far away from that. I need information management systems. So, and the other thing that's really interesting is this, that plagiarism is only one thing. That the other cousins, cheating, fabrication, falsification, multiple submission, complicity. And what is really interesting is even those that look like, blatant deception, would be someone else's interpretation of what you thought was not cheating. Someone else's interpretation of what you thought you were not really fabricating, but somebody interprets that way. Yes, so we do need to pay attention to these negative things. We cannot avoid talking about plagiarism. We should avoid plagiarism. Right? It's a difficult conversation because the lines are so blurred. If we avoid talking about it, then we may not be avoid doing it unintentionally. And someone else might look at it as intentional. And in fact, universities do not make a big distinction between intentional and unintentional. But let's move away from that to our actual real stuff that we want to do today. This is where it gets really interesting and positive and inspiring. Okay, let's leave the anxiety-inducing part behind. It is about a mindset of how you look at knowledge. If you look at the cultural difference of plagiarism, like when I was a master's degree student, my first master's degree in a different country, a little tiny country in South Asia called Nepal, we copied all of the textbooks, photocopied, because the textbooks were printed in Britain and they would cost more than 1 month's salary if you actually bought them. 128-pound textbook on cultural theory, we didn't make 128 pounds a month. So, to this day, I support the idea of photocopying those books. In that context. Who's going to? You see what I'm saying? So there are these contexts, contextual differences where the idea of, like if somebody copies a book here, I'm like, buy it. Somebody spent a lot of time working on it. Even though I think that the authors should make all their books open source, I'd like to. I do think that, because most of them are paid to do a different kind of work anyway, so they're able to do that. They're not making a lot of money anyway, so they only allow middlemen to make money. So wow, just try and publish books. As I mature in my career, I'm going to stop, publishing anything that will cost anything. We're already paid by public money anyway, right? But look at the context. In the context of this little tiny country with so low income and people having to buy books that's more than 2 months' salary, versus us, the context makes it different. We cannot simply say, you apply a universal rule in plagiarism. Then it comes down to this idea of how we think knowledge production and knowledge consumption. In undergraduate degrees, we want students to master the concept, right? But in graduate school, we are pushing them from consumers to producers of knowledge. Your research agenda, your project, your argument, your paper, your article. It is this shift that is number one. Number two, if you look at that consumer to producer shift, then you'll see things like teachers asking you to come ready to discuss in class. So that's baby step one. Go to class ready to talk about it. Don't be shy. Don't be in a consumer mode and don't master everything. I'm talking to my international students here in particular. Not from all places, but from many places where this content delivery and exams and assessment was so dominant, we learned to just learn. And we're so good at that, that's not enough. Here, that's not enough. It pushes us in the context of what's your thought? What's your opinion? Even if it's not really original in the beginnings. Get started. Then I'm going to challenge you to study a little bit more. I'm going to challenge you to think through a little bit more. I'm going to challenge you to go find out more evidence to support your ideas a little bit more. But we have to start with the first step, which is responding thoughtfully, critically to other people's ideas. That may not go into your paper, but you have to be active readers. Then the second one is personal response, criticism, analysis. So these are also things that you need to keep pushing. It's not either or. It's not like, oh, I don't know anything versus I am a scholar. We don't get 34 years old and go to a mirror and oh, Sam, this morning somehow you're a scholar. So it takes these responding more critically, analytically, substantively, reading more actively, writing more on the margin, and these are the steps that begin to. And if you have a project, I'm going to get to that in a moment. If you have a project, wait, I'll get to that in a moment. But finding a gap, developing a research agenda, and actually stating what your research agenda is. Even before you're at the end of your PhD and somebody asks you to write a statement of research statement, write your research statement. What is your goal? Or talk about it. What's your goal in terms of producing knowledge, in terms of applying knowledge, in terms of making an intervention in the real world, in terms of your voice and uniqueness in your field as a scholar. So if you begin to push through reading, through reviews, through presenting, through discussion, through party conversations, through organizing your materials, but don't hesitate. I think hesitation is what is keeping us from developing and presenting strong ideas, right? Don't hesitate. Be critical. You'll make mistake. Someone will smile and say, maybe not. Why not, right? I'll give you a quick example. I was interviewing, I think the Writing Center director of MIT. And then he gave me a powerful example. There was an Israeli student, not even someone from too far away, and this student was hesitating to write brag, he said, in the CV. And every time he said, don't say this, put a stronger accent word, accent verb. And the student says, no, right? And he's wondering, like, I'm the tutor, I'm the expert. Why is this student hesitating? After a while, the student said, I don't want to brag, right? And then he had to say, no, this whole thing is about bragging. Your job application is about bragging, your research statement is about bragging. Of course, don't falsify anything, don't tell a lie. But present it in the best light possible, otherwise you're not playing this game. In this culture, that's how it is played. I think that same analogy can be brought here too. Often, you have a strong idea, but present it with confidence, present it in context, present it with rationale, present it with purpose, present it with a claim, right? And then the originality goes on. Originality is not just something objective. Oh, if I find all of the facts, then I'll be original. That's important, but projecting yourself, positioning yourself, speaking with, right, is important. So a lot of times when students hesitate, their ideas are here, other people's ideas are there. With the same amount of ideas, there's a study I read somewhere. They studied men versus women leadership, and they found that if there are 5 problems to be solved, the women had solved 3 problems, and then when they asked, are you ready for the project, to launch the project, they said, no, I don't know 2 more things. They went to the men, you can guess what they said. I know 2 things already, so I'm going to start anytime. So sometimes it may be gendered in a sense, right? It may be received with gender bias, with racial bias, with other kinds of biases. So it is important that we present, learn to market our ideas. Originality is also about marketing your ideas. It's framing ideas. It's about situating ideas. So one thing that I was going to say quickly was, we talked about that. One of the slides may not be in order, I realized before I was heading here. So I was telling you, it's not as simple as, is this original or not original? It depends on context, right? A business letter doesn't need to be that original, but if you look at the statement of purpose, it is absolutely your statement of purpose. College student, 6th grade student, if you look at the levels, then what is original for one student, the 6th grader is not original for. It's relative to audience, relative to what you expect, expectation, right? Oh, sorry, the things are also not in order. I like this slide, so I added too late. Scholarly book versus dissertation. In a scholarly book, they're looking at the field from here, and they keep making these broad statements without acknowledging a lot of people in the field. Did you know this? There's an age bias, so to speak. If you get older, you don't have to abide by the same rules like your parent and like. You see what I'm saying? But in the dissertation, they're literally asking you to demonstrate that you can do. So there is this sort of being judged as a component of it. You're being judged for citing other people's ideas, right? Once you pass that test, maybe you don't have to worry that much. See that interesting context difference? Purpose. There's a different purpose in textbook versus journal articles. A lot more originality, a lot more, let's say, content transfer. A lot more argument, a lot more information. The objective is to persuade, the objective is to inform. Again, I told you about this one, right? So what's your practical tip? See, this is an undergraduate student, and maybe some of you do too. What would be your tip for other students to say, one really good idea, do this? What is it? Anybody?
Okay, you start.
No, I was asking if it was popcorn style or we were actually doing it.
No, popcorn. Yeah, go ahead.
No, he's gone.
Yeah, like I don't know about like the writing part. Like talking about, like I want to say about the pictures, like the plagiarism of the pictures.
Uh-huh.
Like,
You have to cite exactly the same way as
yeah.
text.
But what I think is, instead of taking the pictures of theirs, we have to build our own pictures.
Uh-huh.
Like the same thing.
Uh-huh.
But we have to build our own pictures and tell them that we are we have copied the concept, but we have done ourselves. Like we have drawn ourselves, but we copied the concept.
Then what you need to do is the original image that you created
Yeah.
will not be cited, but the ideas before and after the image, when you have that, when you do that discussion, that's when you have an opportunity to acknowledge where you draw the idea. Got it?
Yes.
Good. That's a good one. That's a good question. What did you have about tips? Tips?
It was kind of based on the method that you had said before in a previous
Session.
workshop, which is the 3-column method
Mhm.
of citation, direct notes, and then whatever commentary I have. So then
That
like
keeps the things
what-
separate.
It's having it physically separated, like, oh, this was my idea about what they said. I'll write what I wrote in the 3rd column, not what.
Exactly. You had a good one related to that, which is use endnotes whenever you copy other people's ideas. Make sure that it is documented and right.
Yeah.
How do you actually do that? There's space.
So you can put comments,
Uh-huh.
or I just create a new file, like a Word file that's just a compilation. But I like that you have a area to put in your own ideas.
On ideas. And we talked about how, you were talking about how whenever you have a reaction, record both your reaction and what you're reacting to. That's a very good idea, because you're not only thinking about how do I acknowledge other people's ideas, you're recording your own ideas. I already told you, our brains are not designed for PhDs, so that's a good idea, because that idea will disappear if you don't record it, right? So whenever you have a strong reaction, record both the reaction and what you're reacting to. This way, you are building a database of ideas. And a database of ideas is always good. It may not be a good idea when you look at it 6 months down the road, but your brain has amazing ways of synthesizing and putting ideas together and building new connections. Billions of connections.
So when you're early enough in like your knowledge field career, what will happen with that reaction is that I remembered that someone else said something different. So
Mm.
then it's more like I picked up a contradiction in the word and not necessarily that I'm having a true reaction. So I don't know how do you distinguish
No, that's
or
a really
develop-
good one. It's called intertextual connections. Intertextual connections are extremely important. Right? To be able to say, oh, someone else has said this also. Always record that. Someone else has said this also. Why? Because you're going to build a paragraph with similar ideas, or you may come up with a new idea out of the connections, as well as out of the gaps. It's easy to see gaps. Often, well, not easy to see gaps. Actually, connections are easier to see. Record them. All right, let's move on with the next activity. This is the one that I am really, I think this is the most substantive part of our conversation today. I want you to read the first draft on this side and take notes, okay? You don't need to do everything, but look at version 1. So we teach students how to do mechanically correct citations, including punctuations in format, where to put the commas, singular double space, paragraph, left center, block quotation, blah, 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 blah. But more than that, we also teach students how to engage sources, right? So what do you think about this sample? Take a few notes, and then we'll look at the improved version on the other side that I rewrote for the student.
Well, the only person they cite or quote, we don't know who Bartlett is. We don't know what field Bartlett is from or where this perspective is coming from. But the only person that they actually end up citing or quoting is the person who they're disagreeing with. So they're not bringing in, right. So the conversation is not clear in terms of, right.
Thank you for using the word conversation. Citing is creating conversation. And if you're not creating conversation, by imagining that this person is in the room, you're in the room, and then you are able to engage them at their level, doesn't make sense. The student simply, I think the student found a quote, roughly related to the topic that they chose. They put a quote in the middle of the paragraph and try to add a sentence in the beginning and 2 sentences afterwards. But their idea is not original at all. If you look at the quotation itself, the whole student's own idea is just a spin-off from the quotation that they found. So they're counting the number of quotations in their paragraph, in their essay. And for that reason, even worse, is the student's own argument clear?
Keep changing.
Is it? Is it clear? Anybody?
Keep changing.
Huh?
Like-
Keep changing.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is not plagiarized at all, but it's deeply problematic. Lacks originality. It's hard to say that this student plagiarized. Even if you read the full source, you cannot actually say that. What the first sentence and the next 2 sentences are like dancing around, they're not exactly plagiarized. But they're total nonsense. Contradiction. What else? What else did you write before we started talking? What did you write?
That they were going back and forth, and a lot of their sentences start with but, and could have been better.
Exactly. but. The rule of thumb is you can say but, however, nevertheless. But, however, generally they stylistically don't sound right. And the logic behind that is you can say but and on counter a second time, but not more. And if it is the third time, this is like alternate, like nevertheless. But that would be a really weird paragraph, right? It's odd when you change turn. Nah. Flesh out the idea and begin with one, so that you don't have to butt yourself twice or 3 times. What else? What else did you write? Any notes? It's exactly 2.
I don't think the students really know what a definition of also.
Yep. Yes. But now, here's the thing. The student, let's say, who wrote this, and the professor who helped to implement. Did I use the same idea, or I think I used it? No, I actually used the same idea. Are no less smart or more smart. The student's smart also. The thing is, the student was not invested in the paper. The student wanted to just complete a paper and get a grade, right? Second, the student didn't have the skill. Often those 2 things are interrelated. If you have the skill, you're going to do something with more investment. Third, maybe that the student didn't invest the time. So it is a mindset issue. It is a time issue. It is an amount of knowledge on the topic. It's not how smart the student is. A lot of times graduate students think, I'm not smart enough to come up with original ideas. No, if you work hard enough, you'll be smart enough on that topic. On that topic. So we're not generally smart or not smart. We're not generally original or not original. We can be smart and original and substantive on a topic. It takes those components. The skills to engage other people's ideas, the skills to invent your own ideas, and I'm going to go into what these invention strategies are in a moment. Let's look at the second side. If you haven't finished reading, finish reading quickly. So I inserted sort of things that students should do in order to engage sources well at 3 levels: mechanically correct, rhetorically effective, and ethically responsible. Meaning they're not only doing commas and periods and whatnot correctly, mechanical, those things matter because they show your professionalism, they show that you're educated, like it or not, like dressing up, it is judged in context of writing a dissertation. You are judged for the final finish up. So that's important, but a lot of people just talk about that. It bothers me when they do that, when it comes to citation. Teach students how to engage sources rhetorically, purposefully. Set up your purpose. Like this is one of the paragraphs supporting the central argument that outsourcing is not just bad, that it's more complex, that it has benefits as well as losses, and we have to be mature and look at the full context. And this one is saying, actually, there are positive sides of outsourcing. We actually, on the trade balance, we have positive. So the student's idea is not entirely original. In fact, this student idea depends very heavily on the source, as you could see. But how does the student engage the source? One, with a purpose. Two, with strategy. Significant strategy, right? So what I want to highlight here, well, let me ask you what you thought, and then I'll highlight one or two things that are really, really important. What do you think about the...
Compared to the first version, the students didn't explain details before the birth, but the version 2, he give us more details after.
Explanations,
Yeah.
discussions. That is called conversation, what you were using earlier. The student engages in conversation. Shows that they read the full article. Shows that they understand the content of the article. Shows that they understand the author's main idea. And if the author were to read this paragraph, they'd be like, whoa, kiddo, you're smart. Or you work hard, right? That's our objective also, to engage the field. And often that's achieves a lot, even in graduate education, achieves a lot. It's 80% of what we could be doing. Others? What do you think about that?
I like the use of transition words because that helps me a lot too, to kind of make sure I'm wrapping back and forth.
Lead in and lead out.
Yeah, lead in.
Yeah, so no, it's a good one. This one has some really good examples. This is worth keeping and looking at another time, I think. Others?
Either this is rhetorical effectiveness or could lead into ethically responsible, but the thing is that in stating verbatim and then following up with this is my interpretation.
Yes.
With he highlights this, then you may have touched on this before, but I think that was a really good.
The
move.
classical advice for how to listen well to people, restate, like this is the more classic, the baby boomer generation advice, like repeat what they have said, summarize, and then build on it. It actually shows you're listening, that you're reading, right? And then that means it's also responsible to the person's idea. You do justice to the person's idea if you can repeat, if you can summarize, if you can understand and represent the context. But you also benefit from doing it. You establish not only the credibility of the source, but your own credibility. That make sense? So, in any piece of writing, even if it is a lit review, some sources must be substantively engaged, some at least. So you might want to say, these are my top 20 sources for substantively engaging. I'm going to give them half a page each. And the rest, group B, I'm going to give a paragraph each. And group C, all the other 80 articles, I'm only going to cite as needed. In fact, some of them might even go into the same parenthesis like 17 authors. They don't get a lot of attention, right? But who do you choose to engage? In fact, there is something called the politics of citation. I'm not going to go there today. The politics of citation, who did you cite, why, where, and how? Yes, a lot of politics happens in citation, including some really nefarious citation practices in the field. Well, this is for another workshop in the future. The workshop that I do on publication, how to get published workshop. In that one, I talk a little bit about the smart citations when you're writing for a journal. I will not go into like, okay, cheat in the following ways, but we'll joke about it. Yeah. Okay, so now, one other thing that I'll say is originality, as you can see here, the students' ideas are not entirely original. The students actually making one central argument. There are many components, many complexities, many dimensions of outsourcing. That is the student's originality, at least for an undergraduate student. When the student came to this paragraph, they actually depended quite heavily on the source. Well, what is original? Here's what is original. Putting this source in the context of a multi-dimensional argument. Finding the right source, putting it in context, that's original. So don't worry, when you're reviewing, even if you don't have a lot of angles and personal interpretations and contextualizations and synthesis and analysis in your review, you will feel dominated by other sources. But what you do, when you bring the sources together, when you show the connections, when you synthesize two or more items, when you apply one to solve the problem, address the gap in another, when you complement one with another, when you complicate one with another, you're still doing a lot of original work. That make sense? Otherwise, especially when you're writing your literature, you will feel dominated and you'll feel like, why am I just doing other people's work of putting them together? The originality is also in, okay, I think I said contextualizing, applying, problem solving, interpreting. So even as you depend very heavily, like in reviews, very heavily on other people's ideas, these these methods enhance your agency. Because ultimately originality is about agency, right? How do you handle, apply, mix? Think about someone who's cooking, right? It's about how they put things together, how they cook it, how they produce something new by using something that already exists. It's not only growing your own food in the garden. That's great. You will be very, very original if you can also do that. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight. Other thoughts and ideas, and then I'm going to wrap up in about 5 minutes. I have a few slides that I think you guys would like. Something. There. Yeah, this one. Any thoughts? I press W means my screen. Any thoughts?
Also referring to this, right?
Referring to that or so far?
In general.
So far. Any lingering anxiety that you like? How do I become more original? How do you develop and flesh out ideas or anything? Or thoughts? Anything? Productive silence. Yeah?
There is this habit that people in my field do of saying in a sentence, it is known that such and such. That.
Vague references?
Yeah, and it's probably like something that is known, that is in a textbook, but what I am having trouble with, like, in trying to become a part of the tribe is being like, when is it alright to be okay with going with, everyone knows this, because yeah, everyone knows this, I may not yet, but what is a good timeline, or what is a good strategy to take into account when it is safe to say it is known that this, versus when it is safe to say these people suggest that this is happening?
I have multiple responses. One is it is relative to audience, but don't imagine that audience was the harshest professor on the team, on your dissertation committee. Don't. Imagine the kindest professor and write, because drafting must be done. Okay? So imagine that professor. And when you revise with the harsh professor in mind, so that you're going to, elevate anything, eliminate anything, revise anything. So it's very important not to try to write everything that is so original that you end up writing nothing. You will procrastinate. It will affect your writing. The other thing that I would say, audience, relative to audience, is maybe you write it up and see what they say. The third is relative to the genre and context, because if it is a dissertation, the expectation may be a little higher, it may sound odd in a dissertation, so become sensitive to, I forgot the Japanese word for this, read the environment, they say. I forgot the phrase. But read the environment. Is that a phrase? Oh, you are a Japanese speaker right here.
Kuki to read the
Kuki.
Kuki.
Kuki, yes, to read the environment, Kuki. Right, read the environment. Who's the audience? My brother speaks fluently and he taught me some. So read the context so that you'll be able to judge. If you're unsure, leave it in a draft. But that's a good point. Others? Quickly?
I I think it's really important to be aware of the publications that articles are being published in. I think sometimes you find, I mean, I come from music history, that's my field, but you find a really interesting article about music, but it maybe is published in a film criticism journal or an art journal or a cultural theory journal. And I think sometimes as grad students, we don't, or definitely undergrads, but even as grad students, we don't always understand those conversations, how a conversation in a cultural theory journal is significantly different than the conversation in the musicology journal. I mean, on one level we do understand that, but really, just being aware, what is the title of this publication, and who are the editors? Who are the people writing in this journal? And is this an interdisciplinary? Because if it's a more interdisciplinary journal where you're going to have people from lots of fields reading
Audience
this particular,
factor,
and that means the audience question. Of course.
And journals demand more than your dissertation. And dissertation, people, the demands are not that high. But in a journal, also the whole system of journals, like the external anonymous peer reviewers, and there's always this reviewer too, as you know him. Everybody knows the reviewer too, right? That guy. So quickly, within maybe 5 minutes max. Developing a strong research agenda, thesis, or argument for the paper means writing with your team if you're working on a team. And often people don't optimize they don't exploit the opportunity of talking, consulting, collaborating, having a drink, having that conversation and making your ideas, you're fleshing out your ideas in day-to-day context. That's one. And second one is reading extensively and also recording your own thoughts along the way, reading actively, annotating and asking questions, and reading purposefully. Even after you finish reading, don't read, in grad school, don't read something just once. It doesn't really work, right? You're going to organize those readings by, okay, this is my article X. I'm going to select all of the articles that I've already read that are relevant to this article. When you put in context, you read it completely differently. So that's when you become more active, more confident, you're a stronger reader with a sense, with a purpose. Often students take for granted what they already know. Don't do that. You are standing on weak grounds if you do that. They write something and they want to forget it. They read something, they want to forget it. No. Your best bet is to rework what you have already read and thought about. To build on what you have already written about. A lot of times the desire for novelty leads to weak grounds on which you try to build novelty. There is an essay by a British writer called Criticism and Individual Talent, T.S. Eliot.